So listen to this. Every single member of the Justice League has something Batman doesn't. Superman has the sun. Wonder Woman has the gods. The Flash has the Speed Force. Green Lantern has a ring pulled from the will of an entire galaxy. And Batman has a trust fund and a bad childhood. That's usually where the conversation ends. He's the weak link, the one who only keeps up because the writers let him, the guy who needs a kryptonite ring in his utility belt just to sit at the same table as his own teammates. But that's not what actually happened. And once you see the actual numbers behind Bruce Wayne, you're going to realize the weak link theory isn't just wrong, it's backwards. Let's start with the part nobody wants to admit. Batman isn't underpowered. He's just the only member of the League whose power source is himself. Superman was born with his abilities. Wonder Woman was sculpted from clay and gifted hers by gods. Batman built his from nothing over 18 straight years, starting at age 8 in a Gotham alley on the night his parents were shot in front of him. By the time he puts on the cowl for the first time, in most tellings, he's in his mid to late 20s, and in that span, he's studied under 12 to 15 different mentors across the globe, depending on the version of continuity you're using. Martial arts masters in Korea, a manhunter in Asia, detectives in the United States, an escape artist, a chemist, an engineer. In the most detailed comic accounts, Bruce Wayne holds functional level expertise in over a dozen martial arts disciplines: judo, karate, boxing, kung fu, jiu-jitsu, aikido, savate, taekwondo, and more, blended into a hybrid style built specifically to counter opponents who are stronger and faster than he is. That's not a hobby. That's a 15-year doctorate with a body count of 0 and a success rate that's kept him alive against gods, aliens, and literal demons for decades. And here's the stat that actually breaks the weak link narrative completely. In the Justice League's own internal rankings, the ones the writers use to justify who outthinks who, Batman is consistently written as having defeated or outmaneuvered every single member of the League at least once, including Superman, in a fight, without any external tech advantage baked in beforehand. Not with luck, with preparation. That's the whole point of Batman. He doesn't win because he's stronger. He wins because by the time the fight starts, he's already been fighting it in his head for 6 months. Look at the specifics, because they matter. Against Superman, the most cited example is a straightforward brawl in which Batman uses a combination of localized kryptonite exposure, an EMP-style device to disrupt Superman's senses, and pressure point strikes learned specifically to disorient someone with superhuman reflexes, and he wins clean, without killing or permanently injuring a man who could otherwise bench press a battleship. Against Wonder Woman, in a sparring context, he's shown holding his own for extended stretches purely on read and counter technique against a several thousand-year-old Amazon warrior. Against Guy Gardner, a Green Lantern, in one of the most quoted single panels in DC history, Batman ends the fight with one punch before Guy even finishes his sentence, and follows it up by explaining calmly that he'd already studied exactly how Gardner telegraphs his right hook. None of these are power scaling arguments. They're all the same argument. Preparation beats raw ability every single time the writers let the two philosophies collide. Which brings us to the first real controversy, the one that almost got him kicked out of the League entirely: the Tower of Babel storyline. Batman had, quietly, without telling anyone, built individualized contingency files on every member of the Justice League. Superman, Wonder Woman, Flash, Green Lantern, Martian Manhunter, all of them, detailing exactly how to incapacitate or kill each one if they ever went rogue. When the villain Ra's al Ghul steals those files and uses them against the League, nearly every member gets taken down by a weapon custom built for their exact weakness. Flash gets buried alive. Wonder Woman gets exposed to a mind control breaking agent. Martian Manhunter gets hit with a compound that mimics fire, his one true fear. And when the truth comes out that Batman wrote the playbook that nearly killed his own team, the League actually votes to remove him. Full stop. kicked out of the Justice League by the people he saved 100 times over. Now here's the part that gets buried under all the outrage. Batman was right to make the files, and everyone in that room eventually knew it. Because 2 years later, in the JLA, Age of Wonder, and later crossover arcs, when Justice League members actually do get mind controlled, actually do get compromised, actually do go rogue under outside influence, it's Batman's old contingency planning, or a version of it rebuilt with the team's own consent, that ends up saving lives. The lesson Batman learned wasn't stop planning, it was loop the team in before the crisis, not during it. That's not paranoia, that's the only member of a team full of demigods insisting that no one on the team, including himself, should ever be above being stopped. Every other Justice League controversy about Batman being the problem eventually resolves the same way. Turns out being the one person prepared for worst case scenarios is exactly why the League survives its worst case scenarios. And notice the pattern, because it's going to repeat throughout this entire video. Every time Batman gets punished for being the most prepared person in the room, the very next arc proves the preparation was necessary all along. That's not coincidence, that's the actual engine of the character. Trust him less, and the story makes you regret it every time. But even the greatest planner in the DC universe eventually runs into a scenario he didn't see coming. And that brings us to the single worst year of Bruce Wayne's life. One most casual fans only know the headline of, Bane broke his back. Here's what actually happened, in order, because the sequence is the whole story. In the Nightfall arc, the villain Bane spends months, in story roughly half a year, engineering Batman's downfall before ever throwing a punch. He empties Arkham Asylum in a single coordinated breakout, releasing essentially the entire rogues gallery at once. Joker, Scarecrow, Killer Croc, Poison Ivy, all of them simultaneously across Gotham. Batman, refusing to rest, refusing to hand off the city, fights every single one of them personally over the following weeks with almost no sleep. By the time Bane finally confronts him, Batman has been awake and in continuous combat for what the comics track as several consecutive days. Bane doesn't beat Batman in a fair fight. He waits for Batman to be a shell of himself, breaks into the Batcave, and then snaps his spine over his knee. Not metaphorically, in the actual panel, paralyzes him. For most heroes, that's the end of the story. For Batman, it's chapter 2. Bruce spends months in physical recovery, first in a wheelchair, refusing to accept that the paralysis is permanent, working with a specialist to slowly regain feeling and movement through sheer repetition. He hands the mantle temporarily to Jean-Paul Valley, a replacement Batman who becomes increasingly violent and unstable without Bruce's restraint, adding spikes to the suit, crossing lines Bruce never would, eventually getting the cowl taken away from him by force. And when Bruce finally recovers enough to reclaim the role, he doesn't just walk back in, he trains from the ground up again, in isolation, rebuilding the muscle and the mind from a body that doctors had already written off, and personally, physically defeats Jean-Paul in single combat to take the cowl back. The same year he defeated Bane, again, this time on his own terms, sober, prepared, and without a shred of exhaustion clouding the fight. The man who got his spine broken by the single most physically dominant villain in his rogues gallery came back within the same year and beat him clean. That's not a writer favoring their favorite character. That's the actual art, panel by panel, and it's one of the most complete redemption stories DC has ever published. Compare that timeline to literally any real-world athletic comeback from a catastrophic injury, and it still holds up as absurd. A broken spine, a full loss of mobility, and a fight-ready return to defeat both his replacement and the man who broke him, inside 12 months, in story. No powers, no healing factor, no borrowed strength, just refusal. Now let's talk about the version most of you actually grew up with, because this is where the weak link theory gets even more embarrassing. Batman the Animated Series. When it premiered in 1992, it wasn't just well received, it fundamentally rewired what an entire generation believed a superhero cartoon could be. It won 4 Emmy Awards. It's still cited by animators and showrunners decades later as the template for the modern superhero adaptation. Direct line all the way to the DC animated universe, to Justice League and Justice League Unlimited, to modern prestige animation as a whole. And the version of Batman it built, the no-kill rule, the the code, the discipline, wasn't a limitation. It was the entire thesis. The show's most acclaimed episode, Heart of Ice, rewrote Mr. Freeze from a one-note gimmick villain into a tragic figure in under 22 minutes, and it did it specifically by showing what Batman represents when he's up against someone whose pain he actually understands. That episode alone is frequently ranked among the greatest single episodes in the history of American animation, sports cartoons, comedies, everything included, not just superhero shows. And it wasn't a one-episode fluke. Across its full run, Batman the Animated Series and its direct successor, Justice League Unlimited, combined for well over a decade of continuous storytelling, redesigned Mr. Freeze, Two-Face, Clayface, and Harley Quinn, a character who didn't even exist in the comics before this show, into some of the most enduring versions of those characters in DC history. Harley Quinn, in particular, went from a one-episode animation gag to a mainstay of DC Comics canon within a few years, a level of crossover influence from a cartoon back into the source material that almost never happens in superhero media. And here's where the running joke about Batman's one rule actually becomes the smartest writing decision in the character's history. Every single major DC crossover event tries to test it. Kill the Joker after he murders Jason Todd. Kill Darkseid to save the multiverse. Kill Superman when he's compromised. And every single time, across nearly every major continuity, Batman refuses, and the story is built specifically to prove why that refusal is the correct call, not a character flaw. In Batman Beyond, set decades in the future, an elderly Bruce Wayne, physically unable to fight anymore, hands the suit to a teenager named Terry McGinnis and continues operating as the guiding intelligence behind a new Batman, proving the rule outlives the body. The no-kill code isn't a rule Batman follows because he's weak. It's the rule that makes sure Gotham has a Batman generations after Bruce Wayne is gone. But the no-kill rule hasn't gone unchallenged everywhere, and this is the controversy that actually split the fan base in half most recently. In the modern live-action films, particularly the versions of Batman played on the big screen in the 2000s and 2020s, audiences and critics started counting, actually counting, tracking on-screen moments where this version of Batman uses a mounted gun on the Batmobile, drives through enemies, or otherwise appears to cause fatal outcomes in ways the comics almost never allow. It became one of the most discussed criticisms in modern superhero film discourse. Clip compilations, essay videos, entire threads dedicated to tallying the number of implied kills, all built around one core argument, that this Batman had abandoned the one rule that actually defines him. Here's what actually happened in response, and it's worth knowing before you pick a side. Some of it is genuinely a writing inconsistency, a byproduct of big-budget action filmmaking treating henchmen the way action movies have always treated henchmen, without thinking through what that means for a character whose entire ethical structure depends on restraint. That criticism is fair, and even people who love those films generally admit it. But the more interesting part is how the character course corrects when the story actually engages with the question directly, rather than just filming an action sequence. In the most recent live-action interpretation, the film explicitly builds an entire arc around Bruce Wayne confronting the fact that his approach up to that point wasn't working, that fear and violence were reproducing the exact cycle that created him, and ends with him choosing, on screen, deliberately, to become a symbol of hope instead of a symbol of vengeance. The character, in real time, correcting the exact flaw the internet had spent years pointing out. That's not a coincidence either. That's the same pattern from the Tower of Babel arc and the Nightfall arc, playing out again in a completely different medium. Criticize Batman for straying from the code, and the next chapter is built specifically to bring him back to it. So let's actually put this together, because now the weak link argument doesn't hold up at all. Here's a man with no powers who has, across mainstream continuity, personally outthought or outfought Superman on multiple documented occasions, built and then voluntarily dismantled the most dangerous contingency plan in superhero history rather than let it be misused, survived a broken spine, and physically reclaimed his identity within the same calendar year, anchored the most critically decorated superhero cartoon ever made, and built a code so airtight it survives being handed down to a successor generations generations later. Compare that to literally any other member of the Justice League and ask yourself honestly, who actually has more instances of overcoming an unwinnable situation through pure will? It's not close. And that's really the whole point of this video. Batman was never the weak link because he was never trying to win the way the others win. Superman wins by being unstoppable. Batman wins by making sure unstoppable was never actually true in the first place. For his enemies, for his allies, and eventually for himself. Every controversy, every scandal, every broken bone in his history isn't a crack in the armor. It's the blueprint for how he keeps getting back up. Bane broke his back and he came back within a year. The League kicked him out and it was his instincts that ended up saving them anyway. He has no powers, no source of strength except himself, and he's still the only member of the Justice League every other hero privately admits they don't actually want to fight. So the next time someone tells you Batman only keeps up because the writers let him, you can tell them the truth. The writers didn't build him to keep up. They built him to be the one person in the room who was already 3 moves ahead before anyone else knew there was a game being played. And so there you have it. This video hopefully changed the way you see Batman forever.